The Ultra series, one of Eiji Tsuburaya's many sci-fi masterpieces to ever grace the eyes of global audiences. After experiencing major success through the theatrical market with his numerous effects-heavy sci-fi epics, such as the Godzilla franchise, Rodan, Mothra, and the Mysterians, Eiji Tsuburaya suddenly became influenced by the potential idea of relocating his effects-driven stories to the small screen through his production company, Tsuburaya Productions. In 1966, this concept came to fruition in the form of the show Ultra Q, which was basically a Japanese version of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. The show centered around a group of characters working for an organization that investigates strange phenomena that plagues Japan. These occurrences were always caused by the presence of strange creatures, such as monsters and aliens, large and small, that ravage the human-populated regions through malicious or natural instinct. The 26-episode show was the most expensive series ever produced in Japan at the time, and it proved to be a huge hit during its syndication. Following that show's success, Eiji Tsuburaya began work on the succeeding and much more popular series that aired from 1966 to 1967, Ultraman. While Ultra Q followed an organization of an entirely human cast of characters, Ultraman partially replicated that format, once again focusing on a team known as the Science Patrol that examined strange cases of monster or alien-related attacks on the country. But the largest change was adding a character amongst said team that harbored the power to transform into Ultraman, a red and silver giant humanoid bent on battling and defeating the episode's featured monster within a 3-minute time span. The show was such a monumental hit in Japan that, after its 3-season run, Tsuburaya soon began production on yet another sequel series, Ultra 7, once again utilizing the formula of a government agency that protects the country from abnormal catastrophes, and a character who has the ability to transform into a giant humanoid to battle the aliens and/or giant monster that appears in the respective episode. Airing on a weekly syndication from 1967 to 1968, Ultra 7 managed to top its predecessor in the ratings. What set the series apart from the preceding Ultraman was that Ultra 7 featured a much darker, more adult storyline and atmosphere during its run, compared to Ultraman's more kid-friendly nature, with only the occasional mature storyline showing up once in a while. Nevertheless, both series are still very highly regarded amongst tokusatsu fans today. The success of both shows are even attributed to the creation of what became known as the Henshin hero genre. Henshin is the Japanese word for transformation. This concept is still seen today in many different forms of Japanese sci-fi shows, such as Kamen Rider and the Super Sentai series, which was later released in the US as the Power Rangers series. After concluding its 49-episode run in 1968, Ultra 7 was intended to be the final entry in the Ultra series. But in 1971, 1 year after Eiji Tsuburaya's passing, the show was revived by his son, Hajime Tsuburaya. The new entry was known as The Return of Ultraman. Despite the title, the hero in this series was actually a brand new Ultraman, simply known as New Ultraman. This was due to a last-minute decision change by the studio, after they originally wanted the first Ultraman to return to Earth. And it's pretty obvious that they initially considered the original Ultraman to be the titular hero of this new entry, considering how closely the new Ultraman resembles the original hero's design. Even after a 3-year gap, the audience craze for Ultraman was still intact, so much so that Tsuburaya Productions annually produced a new entry in the series until the end of 1975, each featuring a brand new Ultraman. After the new Ultraman accomplished his storyline, he was subsequently followed by Ultraman Ace, Taro, and then Leo. In 1979, 4 years after the end of Leo, Japan saw the release of the first animated Ultra series, simply called The Ultraman, though the hero was commonly known as Ultraman Jonias or Jonius in some sources. And in 1980, there was the addition of the Ultra with perhaps the grooviest theme song, Ultraman 80, which concluded its syndication in 1981, thus ending the Showa era of Ultraman.
Ultraman 80, Ultraman 80, he came to us from the star.
This particular series saw several episodes that were directed by the late Noriaki Iwasa, well known for directing 7 of the 8 original Gamera movies. It also featured a collection of monsters that were designed by a young Shinichi Wakasa, long before he promoted himself to the effects staff of the Heisei and Millennium Godzilla movies. And in 1990, following a 9-year hiatus from their insanely popular, long-running franchise, Tsuburaya Productions once again revived their trademark series, but not in the domestic market. Instead, Tsuburaya decided to advance the Ultra series by relocating the plot and production to not just a different country, but a completely new continent. In this case, the new land of choice became Australia, where the crew immediately got to work on the very first English-speaking Ultra series, Ultraman Towards the Future, which was distributed in Japan under the title Ultraman Great, though strangely it never actually aired in Australia from what I've read, and it didn't even reach American airwaves until 1992, and Japan in the summer of 1995. The precise budget has never been specified, but reportedly, Ultraman Great set a record as the most expensive entry out of all the preceding Ultraman shows. A record that, at the time, was held by Ultraman Taro, which aired from 1973 to 1974. How this 13-episode series was able to prove more expensive than the older 53-episode series will forever baffle me, but we'll get onto that a bit later. If this claim is true, did these extra costs allow the series to accomplish any memorable feats to make it a decent accessory in the already lengthy and popular franchise? Or is it just a cash grab meant to be left in the dirt? Let's assess the series and decide on a verdict. Oh, and just a heads up, the series review will be made up of footage I obtained from a bootleg DVD set I bought at G-Fest 6 years back. For some reason, the quality of the episodes were presented differently on each disc. While the first 5 episodes have a slight blur on the picture with weak audio, the last 8 episodes have improved picture and audio quality. These same 8 episodes also came with Japanese subtitles for the character dialogue that are embedded onto the DVD screen, and so I can't turn them off, even for this review, just in case anyone would start wondering. Now, onto the story. While undergoing an exploration mission on Mars, 2 astronauts named Jack Shindo and Stanley Haggart share an encounter with an enormous, parasite-like monster, later referred to as Gudis. Just as the 2 men are about to be crushed by the creature, a red and silver humanoid giant suddenly leaps onto the scene to do battle with the monster. The giant succeeds in defeating Gudis, but not before it kills Stanley and destroys the ship, leaving Jack stranded on the planet. And more, after Gudis is supposedly killed, his body then deteriorates, breaking down into a green, bacteria-like form that flies off to invade Earth. Realizing Jack will die on Mars without a ship, the giant merges its life force with him, becoming one and the same with Jack, before flying off to Earth, to await Gudis' counterattack. Somewhere in Australia lies the location of Jack Shindo's headquarters, known as UMA, Universal Multi-Purpose Agency, an organization bent on following and intercepting any kind of entity or occurrence that poses a threat to the populace. It doesn't take long for the team to partially upgrade their status to an anti-monster or alien threat organization, as Gudis wastes almost no time before commencing his first strike on Earth. Harboring the ability to manifest itself into a germ-like substance, with rapid transportation speed from location to location, Gudis is able to invade and mutate the body of whatever organism it comes into contact with. In the very first episode, he uses this power to infect a tadpole, transforming it into a dreaded 2-headed monster called Bogan. Yuma is quickly dispatched to attempt to destroy the monster, only to realize their weapons are nearly futile against it. Realizing the city is defenseless against the monster, Jack changes himself into the giant humanoid from Mars to defeat Bogan. At first, Yuma is unsure of what to do with the new Titan that has just manifested before them. It may be attacking the monster, but what will it attack next? Fearing the new giant might pose another threat to the city, the leader of Yuma, Arthur Grant, orders his ground team to attack the giant, marking the first time in series history that the characters initially feared to be dangerous. Shortly after conferring the order, he realizes that the humanoid seems to bear a resemblance to the description given by Jack and Stanley of a similar creature they saw on Mars, before losing contact with Yuma after Gudis' attack. Deciding that Ultraman is clearly on their side, and fearing their continued assault would only put the civilians below in an even greater danger, the ground troops refuse Arthur's orders to attack any further. This grants Ultraman enough time to gain the upper hand and quickly dispatch Bogan, thus ending Gudis' first assault on Earth. By episode 3, Jack is fully re-enlisted in Yuma as part of their defense team. Together, through their stoic teamwork displayed amongst each other, and their selflessness to put the safety of the Earth before their own lives, the 6 main characters of Yuma strive to protect the country from future Gudis attacks, as well as other monsters that show up every now and again to threaten mankind's very existence. You can almost see the team as a near replica of the Science Patrol group from the original Ultraman. How does Ultraman Great do it differently, you might ask? Well, it's different in quite a few ways, to be honest. For starters, that would be the narrative, which coincides with the reason why Ultraman's power is so limited in this entry. You see, when Ultraman Towards the Future went into production, eco-awareness was at an all-time high. This prompted the series creators to implement an environmental protection theme into the show's plot, compared to past shows, which featured mere Monster of the Week type episodes during their respective run. In Towards the Future, every episode makes a reference to the damage being caused to, or currently witnessed in the environment, which are either caused by Gudis' influence on the ecosystem, or from mankind's own series of past and current follies. For instance, Ultraman Great's color timer. In every preceding and succeeding series, Ultraman can't fight on Earth for any longer than 3 minutes. This is due to his lack of access to sufficient solar radiation to sustain his power, as he's a being who hails from a planet that transmits an astronomical amount of heat and light. However, in every episode of Ultraman Towards the Future, the narrator specifies to the audience that the reason for Ultraman's dwindling power, while in his giant form, is due to his exposure to Earth's quote-unquote polluted atmosphere.
Because of Earth's polluted atmosphere, Ultraman can only retain his gigantic form for 3 minutes. Time is running out.
This conceptual idea is very unusual, as it's never been the primary focal point of any other Ultraman series, even to this day. So, naturally, it's very bizarre that the writer decided to add that ingredient into the mix. And not to mention, it's extremely out of place when compared to any other Ultraman. Episode 7 featured the monster Gazebo, who was awakened to defend his home forest from a construction crew that intended to build a bypass through a canyon that was thought to be abandoned. To put it in layman's terms, it's an analogical reference to animals and their habitat being disrupted by human cultural progress. Episode 9 featured a biotechnical institute that was in league with an alien species, unknown of the latter's secret agenda to actually remove the scars of human and animal existence, to make the growth of the planet more suitable for their needs. Some species may survive and recover, but the populations will still be limited.
According to my calculations, your species is subjecting this life form to a hostile environment which will destroy it.
What do you mean? What life form?
Your planet. You are destroying its life systems. Fortunately, my species is able to utilize such an environment and will rejuvenate it.
When Jack tries to argue with the aliens, known as Bios, that they'd be committing a mass extinction, the aliens retort that it's something mankind should be used to, that the aliens are mere competitors with them. In episode 10, Charles, the science specialist at Yuma, bonds with a space woman that has just arrived on the planet, though he's oblivious to her real origins until much later in the episode. There's a scene in which Charles takes her to a zoo, where she remarks about how appalled she is that people would be so cruel by putting animals in crammed enclosures so people can gawk at them. It's a topic that's only brought up one time, and it's very brief, so it doesn't exactly impact the plot all that much, but it's very clear of the writer's intentions with that short scene. The biggest example of the show's eco-commentary is in the final 2 episodes, when Yuma is preparing a satellite that can aid in the repair and protection of the ozone layer. The access to clean, drinkable water starts to diminish because of a toxin that has entered the water supply and has even contaminated various food sources. Just when things couldn't possibly get any worse, 2 new monsters are summoned by an unseen force. The first is a sea monster named Kodara, or Kodalar as some fans call him, and the other is a flying creature from space named Shalagi, or Kelazi, as he's known online for some reason. While trying to cope with and contain the sudden famine, prepare for or halt the arrival of Shalagi, and attempt to bring down Kodara, who actually managed to defeat Ultraman Great in the first round, The characters soon realize that the culprit behind the genesis of these recent bizarre monstrosities is the Earth itself. This was discovered when Yuma finally managed to test their satellite on Earth's ozone layer, only to realize that there was a force that was preventing their repair measures from taking effect, a force that was generated from the planet below.
One that was bound in the deep.
There's something else down there and it's moving.
One that was born to the sky.
The destroyer. It's the Shillagi.
And shall be called from its sleep.
The one who sleeps below.
Yeah, well, whoever that is, he's not asleep anymore.
He's the third monster, Charlie. We're fighting the Earth.
According to the characters, as well as the overall moral of the last 2 episodes, humans need to learn to coexist with the Earth rather than strive to master it, a concept that makes no sense whatsoever, even for Ultraman standards. Not once does the episode ever explain how the Earth has some kind of sentience that allows it to disrupt the ecological elements of its surface, or how it called forth the presence of Kodara and Shillagi. And I for one consider it baffling that the planet would straight up resist aid from those that are trying so hard just to keep it safe and protected. Yuma's attentions from the very announcement of the satellite were for the betterment of the environment, as opposed to the whole mastering thing that was brought up. Perplexed by all this? You should be. As you may have already gathered, Ultraman Great's biggest con is not bolstered by its effects or acting, but rather from its flawed writing, which includes the environmental commentary being blatantly shoved in our face every so often.
Do you think this microbe will give us some trouble?
We've already got it. It was only a matter of time before the ocean gave us back some of our own medicine.
This is fairly similar to the change in narrative and complaints targeted at the 11th series of Doctor Who. Back in the day, both sci-fi shows presented episodes that were purely Monster of the Week showcasings, but in these particular entries from both shows, it all changed so that the writers could add some kind of political atmosphere, which often seemed to overshadow the creatures in their respective stories. Doctor Who Series 11 was especially guilty of having its forced messages serving as a stronger topic than the monster of the episode, messages that some viewers found over the top or distasteful, as well as scripts that fans considered to be very poorly written, even if they didn't contain the political narrative. While I personally found Towards the Future a lot more enjoyable and endurable than most of the episodes of the last season of Doctor Who, anyone who wasn't too thrilled with that season will probably be turned off by Great's narration about the preservation of our earthly environment. Now don't get me wrong, I'm all for keeping the environment safe and inhabitable for all forms of nature, human, animal, and all the living and non-living components making up the basic factors of our ecological gene pool. But when it comes to fiction, there's a right way and a wrong way to make your message understood amongst the public, especially when you're dealing it through a series that's been around for decades and never once expressed this type of commentary throughout an entire season. When it came to its messages and scripts, Towards the Future was okay in some ways, but over the top in others. It was weak in some fields, strong in others, and somewhat mixed when it came to other episodes. That includes the characterization of the heroes, and their development and motivations throughout the 13 episodes.
I just can't believe you're 5,000 years old. You sound just like a kid.
Look who's talking. Staying in there won't solve anything.